Have you ever hurt a part of your body? Not so much that you want to see a doctor, but enough that it makes your everyday activities an inconvenience. I once hurt a part of my arm, and I realized I would reach for things weird to avoid the pain. And after I felt that pain for a long time, my body would just naturally avoid the pain by reaching in weird ways. I equate that feeling with racism. We don't acknowledge it, we don't diagnose it, we don't treat it, but we do everything we can to avoid the pain. You might have noticed that I'm Black, but being Black does not make me an expert on racism. Not until I went to my first anti-racism training did I understand the systems in play around racism. Now, have you seen the movie The Matrix? I hope so, it's my favorite movie of all time. But a pivotal part of The Matrix is when Morpheus gives Neo an option. He says you can take the blue pill or you can take the red pill. Now, Neo could take the blue pill. If he took the blue pill, he'd go about his everyday activities, wake up in his bed, and live on the notion that ignorance is bliss. Now, if he chose the red pill, he wouldn't have that option. His eyes would be awakened to the truth. He would see what was really going on in the world around him. He would fully understand the matrix. Taking anti-racism training is taking the red pill with no option of the blue pill. Your eyes are open to the truth. You understand the systems that are in play. You learn that race is a false construct with very, very real consequences. You understand that racism is systemic. That's what our country was built upon. You also understand that oppression is the main focus of racism, oppression for people of color. Now, when I learned these things, I was like, whoa, just like Neo in The Matrix. It's a lot to take in, but it's the truth. The other most transformative part about anti-racism training is listening to the stories of others. When you're in the training, thankfully you do laugh, but also people cry. People share stories of how they feel shame, frustration, and anger based on the way they were treated. And this treatment has come from their family, their friends, but most likely strangers. And when you hear these stories, you realize they're not extreme. They don't involve hate groups. They don't involve death. They're built on everyday experiences. My sister just told me a story of one of her experiences. And this experience was at the grocery store. Now, my sister is a lawyer. She prides herself on fighting for people who feel discriminated against. So she went to the grocery store. She picked up her items that she picks up all the time, places them in her cart, and goes to the cashier. She starts placing those items on the conveyor belt one at a time. The cashier sees a bowl of pre-cut fruit, and she asks my sister, "Do you know how much that costs?" My sister says, "Yes, I buy it all the time." And she continues to put items on the conveyor belt. The woman then says, "Do you know about SNAP?" And my sister said, "No, I don't." And then she started getting confused. She didn't know where this conversation was going. The woman finally got to her point. SNAP is like food stamps. You should get on them. It would save you some money. My sister was frustrated and upset as she paid for her groceries. An everyday activity, an everyday occurrence. You can feel that pain, right? Now, my parents provided my sisters and me endless opportunities. We were ready to be successful in this world. We were warned, though. I can clearly hear my mother's voice saying, "You will have to work harder. You will have to be smarter. You will have to be better." And there was no question in my mind who I needed to be better than. And I realized, as my parents built me up, they told me I was beautiful. They told me I shined on stage. They told me I was great. They knew they had to do this because they knew the world would be trying to bring me down. So they proactively built me up. We learned about Black poetry. I had to recite Black speeches. I learned about Black history. I even wore African garb, all to find pride in being a Black person. They knew as soon as I stepped out of my house, I would be treated a different way, that people would determine my value, my worth, by the color of my skin. Now, because my parents wanted me to be successful, I don't remember learning about systemic racism growing up. They told me I could be whatever I wanted to be. They told me I could change the world. They told me I could dream my wildest dreams. And with their support, I did. I became a ballerina. I experienced the joy of dancing on stage, and nobody told me I couldn't do it. Now, as I retire, I find pride in still speaking about the lack of diversity in ballet. I speak on panels and summits around the United States to artistic directors, executive directors, and school directors of America's major ballet companies. I recently spoke on a panel in a major city. And when I got to the city, I had a few hours to spare. So what did I do? I went shopping. It's the best feeling when you show up saying, look what I got. And they're like, where'd you get that from? You're like, I got it in another city. You can't get it. I looked up the places where I could go in this city. I found the cutest boutiques and headed over there. When I walked in the door, I immediately felt uneasy. I walked in the door and I wasn't acknowledged verbally, but people saw me because I was the only one in the store. And as I walked around the store, I realized I was being followed, but still not being acknowledged. I knew a person was behind me. I felt their presence. I saw them, but there was no conversation in play. Well, I realized I'm not going to spend my money in the store, and I left. As soon as I got outside, I went on my phone, and I looked up the Black population in this city, 7.7%. And I wondered, the people in the store, do they not know any Black people? Have they never heard the stories of Black people? They just assumed by the way that I looked that I would be a certain type of way. After this experience, I went to speak on the panel. Once again, I talked about the joys of performing on the stage, but also the challenges of being a Black ballerina. And when we came to a point in the discussion where we talked about feeling welcome in a room, I had to share what happened to me just a few hours before. I said, how am I supposed to feel welcome? When I walk into a boutique and there's people that don't look like me, and I'm alone, they assume the worst of me. Now, how do I feel when I walk into a dance studio and I'm the only person that looks like me? I'm assuming that they're assuming the worst of me. How do I feel welcome? How do I feel included? And of all the things I said on the panel, that's what resonated with people the most. When the panel was completed, people came and spoke to me, and they apologized. They said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry this happened to you. I'm sorry this happened to you in my city. And I was really proud. They heard me. They listened to my story. They understood what I was going through every day. And hopefully that will change the way they see things. When I get to speak about what's going on with me, I find pride in that. But I also love listening and learning so I can learn how to best help other people. I went through transgender training. And this training, I learned a lot about being gender diverse. But the most important thing I learned in that training was when the woman who was leading the training said this. She said, transgender people have a high rate of being victims of violence. And my heart broke. How are people treated this way just because of who they are? But then she took it one step further. She said, transgender people of color have the highest rate of being victims of violence. Whenever we're dealing with inequalities, injustices, people of color are always on the bottom. When you think of what's most important to you, are you thinking of the people of color too? Are their voices being heard? Are people fighting for them? Here in Illinois, there's a high rate of crime for people of color. Also, people of color here in Illinois and children have the highest rate of poverty. As we try to fix all of these social issues, we have to think of those people on the bottom. Now, last year we celebrated the Women's March, and I really thought about marching. I wanted to be out on the streets with the rest of the women in the world. But as I examined the march, and I didn't see people that looked like me, and I didn't hear issues that were about me, I wondered if I should participate. I chose not to. I said, I don't see myself there. But then I checked social media, and people made their own posters, and they chose their own fights. There were posters that were witty, posters that were quirky, posters that were nasty. And I realized people were choosing what to fight for, and I could do the same. So this year I marched. But first, I got my poster ready. I chose a black poster board with gold letters and stars, because I love stars. And my sign proudly read, "I march for racial equity." And as I took that sign and held it high above my head and marched down the streets of Chicago, I was proud. People would read my sign. People would hear my voice. I had chosen to take action, and they would see me. As you listen to the stories that I've told, how do you feel? Did I make you uncomfortable? Did I make you sad? Did I make you hopeful? I hope that you were empathetic. I believe that listening and learning is a great way to develop empathy. And not just empathy that lasts for a moment, but bold empathy, a commitment to lifelong listening and lifelong learning, and recognizing the idea that there should be no hierarchy of human value. Have an urgency to listen to the stories of others. Seek out people that look like you, sound like you, or even believe what you believe. I believe that's the way bold empathy will begin. My parents, my family, my community taught me to be happy, taught me to be prideful of being a black person. I didn't choose to be black, but I'm so proud that I am. I can't stop being black, and you can't begin, but you can begin to listen. Thank you.